Welcome to another exciting new episode of Talking About Stoicism. It's been a long time that I did one of these videos, and that's not for lack of interest, but simply a matter of lack of time. I've been very busy, work things, etc. And as a result, I just had to, something had to give. And given that the pen reviews on this channel are the most popular videos, that's what most people are here for, I thought it would be fair to prioritize those. Excuse me. Having said that, it is certainly my intention to continue doing Stoic videos. It may just not be at the frequency they used to come out with. Now, I got a question from a viewer on one of the Stoic videos. They said, do you reckon you can do a video on Stoic, good, evil, and indifferent, explaining each category? You explained it perfectly so briefly in this video. It would be great to see another one of these. Well, thank you for the kind words, first of all. I think I can, and I have touched on these kinds of topics in the past. Sip of tea. More detail, less detail, but this is a very foundational concept in Stoicism, so I think it is a nice start to get back into this for me to try and do this. So yes, I'll do my best. To think about Stoic, good, and evil, I think the easiest way forward is to try and situate Stoicism in or among other Hellenistic schools of philosophy. Let's start with, I'll just do two of them, then we'll move on to Stoicism, because you will see the contrast that I think is so interesting about Stoicism. Let's start with Aristotle, the people who follow Aristotle, peripatetics. So, Aristotle said, if you want to lead a good life, you need to be virtuous. If you're not virtuous, you can't have a good life, because if you're not doing the right thing, you can't really be satisfied and happy. Now, you could debate whether that's even true, because I think a lot of people in the world today, like say billionaires, do whatever they want, and they don't seem to be perturbed, and they are definitely not virtuous. But let's just accept for this particular discussion the idea that doing the right thing will make you happy. That's part of, I would say, Hellenistic ethics. And remember, ethics in ancient philosophy are not really a matter of should abortion be legal or not, but ethics really are a set of guiding principles to lead a rich and fulfilling life, which the Hellenistic philosophers called eudaimonia, so a rich and fulfilling life. So the peripatetics, the followers of Aristotle, they say, okay, so you need virtue. But Aristotle said more than that. He said you also need to have money, because that allows you to live relatively carefree, so you will need some sort of wealth. You will need a certain level of health, because that will allow you to be healthy. And if you're healthy, it's easier to lead a good life, because you're healthy. And Aristotle even said you have to be somewhat attractive, because if you're not attractive, you can't really be happy. Well, that's a very interesting statement that I think we would object to quite strongly these days. So that is one way of one Hellenistic school of philosophy looking at a rich and fulfilling life. To lead a good life, you need these things. And if you don't have these things, well, then you will not be leading a good life. And I guess that kind of comes down to evil, because if you're not doing the right thing, then you're doing the wrong thing. And if the right thing is the good thing, then the wrong thing is an evil thing. Right? So think of those things. Like, say, one of the cardinal virtues is temperance. Do everything in moderation. And then the opposite of that is gluttony, and that's a bad thing. Now you overindulge in things, like, for example, food. Right? So that would be evil. Okay, then you have another Hellenistic school of thought, the cynics. Now, these days, when we think of cynics, we think of people who might be a bit combative, or who are super skeptical, not to be confused with the skeptics, but the people who don't really believe that things are as people say, etc. But cynicism, as a Hellenistic school, was a very interesting school of thought that I think is, of the other Hellenistic schools, probably the closest to Stoicism. In fact, Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, was initially trained in cynicism. And a lot of the Stoic ideas are rooted in cynicism. And the cynics, they were very interesting. There is, of course, the famous story of Diogenes the cynic and Alexander the Great, right? Alexander standing over him as he is sitting in his barrel where he lived. And Alexander asking Diogenes if he needs anything because he's heard that he's such a great philosopher. And Diogenes says, yes, you could get out of the sun. That's all I need, right? Another great story about Diogenes is the cynics kind of abolished money. They tried to not have many possessions. They also masturbated and had sex in public, by the way, but that's a whole different story. They really went against the grain, and they tried to get rid of their possessions. And there is a story about Diogenes where one of the few possessions he had left was a cup. And then he saw a boy go to the river and cup his hands and drink from his hands. And Diogenes gets kind of disappointed in himself and gets rid of his cup because he doesn't even need that, right? And final thing that I really like about the cynics is that one thing they apparently did was when, say, a theater performance was over and everybody would leave the amphitheater and such, the cynics would go against the stream. They would actually walk physically against the stream of people to, again, go against the grain. So it's a very interesting school of thought. Now, the cynics, they did away with all the sort of peripheral things that the peripatetics said you need to be happy. So they said, okay, so virtue is indeed the most important. You have to do the right thing. And then the cynics said, and beyond that, you don't need anything. So health, wealth, being attractive, all these kinds of things, social status are all unnecessary. In fact, if anything, they seem to have said something along the lines of that's just a distraction. Wealth is a distraction from doing the right thing. You have to be virtuous. That is good. And everything else is evil. So now you have two kind of opposing views, right? To the petty level of you have to be pretty, otherwise you can't be happy, to all you need to do is do the right thing. When you are virtuous, you will be happy. That is good. And then along come the Stoics, again, rooted initially through Zeno in cynicism. And the Stoics develop a new viewpoint. They say, okay, so really, you should be virtuous. These are absolute virtue ethics. Virtue is the most important thing in leading a good, happy, and fulfilling life. You should do the right thing. You should be virtuous. Now, excuse me. In addition to that, they say there are certain things that could make you happy or could make you not happy. Wealth is a good example. And for that, they come up with a new term, which you can translate as an indifferent. So not indifference with a CE at the end, but an indifferent with a T at the end. Plural indifference. And they said there are kind of desirable indifference, preferred indifference, and non-desirable indifference, non-preferred indifference. Those things are indifferent not because you are indifferent towards them. That's in itself kind of a Stoic thing, right? You are detached from, say, emotions. That doesn't mean you don't have emotions, but it does mean that you can take a step back and you try to be detached from them. But when it comes to the indifference, the Stoics are not indifferent to these things. The Stoics are not indifferent to wealth. They are not indifferent to health, because that's another indifferent. But the Stoics said those phenomena are indifferent to virtue. So what they meant by that was, take something like wealth. Well, all else being equal, most people would rather have money than not have money, especially in our day and age. You need to live, you need to pay for a place to live, you need food, you need all these kinds of things. And it wasn't that much different in the time of the Stoics. So they said, however, wealth can be used in a good way, or it can be used in a bad way. Again, easy target these days, but think of billionaires, right? You could use your money for good, and then it's virtuous, or you could use your money for evil. And then that would not be virtuous, that would actually be bad. And if you do that, well, then how can you expect to be happy? Because you're doing the wrong thing. So, they would say, wealth is a preferred indifferent. All else being equal, you'd rather have money than not have money. But then health, depending on how you look at it, could be a dispreferred indifferent. So they say, like, for example, being ill, all else being equal, you would rather not be sick. Dispreferred indifferent, right? You would rather not have that. However, so the Stoics say, if you are sick, you can still do the right thing. You can still be virtuous, or at least try to be as virtuous as you can be. You will fail sometimes, you will mess up a couple times, but overall you can try to still do the right thing, sick or healthy. And likewise, whether you are rich or poor, you can still do, or at least attempt to do, the virtuous thing. And therefore, wealth is a preferred indifferent, health is a preferred indifferent, sickness is a dispreferred indifferent. And you can come up with other examples, but health and wealth, I think, are easy examples because everybody can kind of relate to that. Who wants to be sick? Who wants to be incredibly poor, right? But take it back to Aristotle. Let's look at beauty. Well, beauty is probably a preferred indifferent. All else being equal, I'm assuming you would rather be attractive than not attractive, whatever that means, right? But theoretically. So that would make beauty a preferred indifferent, and ugliness, again, I use this very lightly, whatever that means, but would be a dispreferred indifferent in the terminology of the Stoics. What I find, excuse me, sip of tea again. What I find remarkable and very insightful about this particular Stoic thought of the indifferents is that you start to see that some things don't matter as much as you think they may. I'm sorry for my voice. I recorded a bunch of videos yesterday and my throat is suffering a bit. Some things don't matter as much as you think they do. Even when you lose wealth, you can still do the right thing. Nobody's saying it would be easy. Nobody's saying that. The Stoics also don't say, like, oh, it doesn't matter. The cynics might. They might say, yeah, good for you. You lost all your money. That's where you should be. Now you can really lead a happy life because now you will see you don't need anything else. For a lot of people, especially in our day and age, that's not that obvious, and it's not that simple. Because again, let's be fair, you need a place to live, you need to buy food, you need to... I get all that, right? So that's not the argument. The argument is not that it would be easy, not from a Stoic viewpoint, but the argument is some things are less important than you may think they are. And I'm not making light of anything. If you are chronically ill, that is very impactful, and nobody would say that it's not. But even when you are chronically ill, you can try to still be a virtuous person. You can say, well, my health is an indifferent, and it is indifferent to virtue. I can still try to do the right thing. I'm not saying this is easy, right? Again, at no point have I said, and that's, this is easy, because that's not how it works. But I can put things in more perspective. And I have found in the past that to me, that kind of thinking has been very helpful. It's been helpful to think, I would kind of like to have this in my life, or not have that, but at the end of the day, it is an indifferent, and I can still try to be a good person, even in light of this, and that's hard enough in its own regard. But that way, some things do get a bit easier. That, I think, is what I would take. Good and evil. There are more complicated arguments to be made. Remember, Socrates said something along the lines of people don't willingly do evil. People do what they think is right for them at a certain point in time, and unfortunately, what is right for them is not always right for you. Now, I think you can debate that a bit. I think that Some people do very evil things, and they seem to have very little remorse. But normal, everyday people like you and I think, can apply that statement more. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make that person's life living hell. Most people don't do that, right? But you may do something that you think is best for you and that ends up not being best for someone else. And you could then further argue whether that is good or evil, right? But I think the indifferents are an eye-opening phenomenon that a lot of people find very interesting, and that tends to put things in their life in more perspective. So there you have it. I hope this was an answer to the question. Thank you very much for patience with this and these videos. Again, I want to do more. I don't know if it's going to be every week. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be every week. But when I can, I will. Thank you very much for watching this. Hope that was interesting. Gave you some food for thought. But let me know what you think of the indifference and how you can apply that in your life, because it's interesting to read for other people. That's what I have. I'm glad to see you later. Bye.